How's it going, guys? Looks like we're live. I hope we're live. Been having a lot of weird technical issues lately. It's been a while. Haven't been streaming much. Tonight we're going to get into the protocol, I guess, that Empire has used to rule for at least 5,000 years. Any conspiracy theorist will tell you that the elites use esoteric knowledge in their management strategy, basically. And they're not wrong. The thing is that most of them don't really understand what esoteric knowledge actually is. And there's two layers to this. One is the use of geometry and the understanding that as above, so below, basically, that there is one underlying architecture and dynamic blueprint that underlies everything in the universe. And the variations that we get are basically the result of recombinatorial differentiation. So you take one thing and you combine it in different juxtapositions and whatnot, right? And we'll get more deeply into that as this series goes on. But basically, once you understand this architecture, you can transpose it to all systems. And we're going to primarily use the symbolism of the triangle and the pyramid to elucidate all of this in this stream. Yeah, so ancient adepts understood that all systems operate according to the same universal laws. Principles that confer stability and physical architecture also confer stability when transposed to informational and social architectures. The machine therefore engineered its socioeconomic hierarchies and its propaganda systems in accordance with nature's principles. The pyramid with the all-seeing eye capstone was chosen as a symbol of empire because the pyramid is the most stable geometric form. Broad base distributing pressure, concentrated apex focusing force, and multiple structural relationships optimizing structural integrity. Those engineering social control recognized they could transpose the architecture to information systems, so they created propaganda based on the same blueprint. And really, everything in nature has this pyramid-shaped hierarchical architecture. As we approach the summit of power and influence, the numbers of people involved shrink, right? So think of like a corporation, and you have the board of directors and the CEO, or if you have municipalities like town, city government, state government, federal government, Congress, and then on up to the president. In nature, we see this in all sorts of different systems as well. And it's because the self-organizing, I don't want to say self-organizing because I'm not 100% sure that that's the whole story. But from our vantage point, it appears to be self-organizing. So, but the developmental trajectory, right? It's 13 billion years. So when you reflect that in your own systems that you create, you're tapping into a borrowed trajectory resource that is 13 billion years in the making, and it literally is made of intelligence, right? You can't do any better than replicating and reflecting these systems. So in a sense, you might even say, well, then it's not wrong because this is what nature does. And so these structures exist because that's how the thing organizes. So we, being extensions of nature, part of nature, just kind of naturally formulate these things in our own systems. That's not untrue. I guess the premise of what I'm presenting here is that I believe that has been exploited. It is not being deployed in the best interest of the collective goal state, which in my opinion for humanity is the realization of optimized potential the expression of like the optimal potential of the human race. And the other side of that coin is to minimize the suffering to that which is unavoidable given the parameters of the system. Does that make sense? Hope that makes sense. Let me check in with the chat, make sure audio is okay and the stream is even working. Good evening. How's it going? Yeah, it's good to see you guys. It's good to be back. I had a really hard time for some reason starting back up with this. It wasn't just technical problems, honestly. I think I needed to take a step back for a second and kind of, it's been a hell of a roller coaster the last couple of years. I just opened the wrong window. And by the way, my notes here are actually a Substack article that I have not yet published. The last one is kind of what inspired the stream. I published it today on propaganda, but not as much the esoteric, more the psychological side of it, kind of focusing specifically on why it is that presidential candidates are so contradictory. And we might get into that a little bit eventually. But let me get back on track here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the symbolism of the all-seeing eye, right? There's layers to this. And maybe we should start with the symbolism of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Well, we don't need to go into all that. Let's just say that the 4 points at the base of the pyramid represent the 4 elements or the 4 fundamental forces of physics, the foundation, right? 4 is the number of stability, the number of foundations. The triangle was used at least as early as the 13th century for triangulating demons, right? People talk about how symbolism is used as a tool for control and influence, but it's not like the symbols have magical power. They represent schematics for their control mechanisms. The architecture of it is depicted in the symbols. It's not about the symbols doing stuff to your mind. They and it's not really symbolic either. It's almost mathematical, but again, it's that thing of being able to transpose the qualities and properties and uses of the triangle geometry in all sorts of different applications, right? So the pyramid, the triangle is used to contain a demon, right? And then the triangulation that we use in landscaping and in military operations and narcissistic control and whatnot, that was not even a concept until the 16th or 17th century, right? And I'm just mentioning that because, in case you doubt that there's esoteric secrets out there that are, they're more advanced than the exoteric, the profane, the outer, people that aren't in the G and O. Speaking of that, actually, let's divert a little bit more. Pythagoras' theorem, legend has it that Pythagoras was actually initiated into the mysteries in Babylonia, maybe Syria, because he was arrested in a war with Egypt, I think, and somehow he got shipped off to other places. And then when he was released, he got initiated into these mystery schools. And that's how he got access to the secret knowledge, and he brought it back to Greece just as the pharaohs were banning it, right? And introducing monotheism as an alternative. Because the mysteries are very empowering, and they did not want the common person to understand these things. Otherwise, they would be fucked. So a cuneiform tablet dating from, I think, 3,000 years before Pythagoras was discovered in Babylon, where he was supposedly initiated into the mysteries, right? And it's the first evidence that it existed prior to Pythagoras. So just no one knew about this for 3,000 years, and we found no evidence of it anywhere. Again, I find that to be evidence in favor of this idea of hidden knowledge. I mean, occult really just means hidden, right? So anyways, triangulation, right? It has to do with the geometry of the pyramid and trapping energy inside of it. So we have 4 pyramids, or 4 triangles that make up each side of the pyramid. And then on the top, we have this eye in a triangle. The eye represents the 1% who believe themselves to be the conscious awareness that has trapped below it the unconscious masses, right? And constrained them just as the magician constrained the demon within the triangle to its will. It is funneling their instinct, and it has mapped their psychology and directed it so that the unconscious masses are constrained to the purposes of the eye in the triangle, right? An interesting thing that people often miss is that eye is also trapped in a triangle. I'm not exactly sure what to make of that yet, but it's an interesting thing to note. Another interesting thing to note, one of the implications of this is that the people at the top of the triangle, or the top of the pyramid, the eye, right? Oh, don't tell me I just lost my train of thought. You guys got to bear with me. I haven't done this in a few weeks. Okay, yeah. So it also symbolizes like the god of this world. So the capstone on the actual Great Pyramid of Giza is missing. That's an interesting thing to note. Again, I don't know exactly what to make of that yet, but it is interesting. And so they're making of themselves God of this world, right? So when the conspiracy theorists say, these rulers are Luciferian, they're not correct in the way that they mean when they say that, but they aren't exactly wrong, because what they've actually done is usurped the genius of the architecture of creation, and they're using that to make gods of themselves. So, you know what I mean? It's fair to say they're Luciferian if that's the context that we mean. So, okay, where are we going beyond that? Eye in the triangle, making gods of themselves. Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack from that. Each of the four sides of the pyramid, each of those triangles represents a different force of containment. You're going to have to follow me on Substack and read the next article if you want to get into all that, because I'm not gonna break it all down yet. But this idea of triangulation then is transposed to other areas, because let me preface this by explaining that a real magician doesn't really use supernatural forces. There's no such thing. There are ways to engage with natural forces that are very sophisticated and appear to the profane to be miracles, but it's really just a matter of triangulating your will, your purpose, your objective with the architectures and dynamics that are already there. So this thing of triangulating with patterns is really the secret to magic. My suspicion, for example, about the magicians that guided, they acted like John Dee, right, was a advisor to, I think, Queen Elizabeth. And, he was one of the most brilliant people of his era. He was a polymath, like pretty much the most advanced person in every science that there was at the time. Multilingual, just complete genius. And there's a really popular theory right now that shamans are actually neurodivergent people. And I can totally buy that. So, when in our culture, we're kind of taught that people like that were just superstitious fuddy-duddies, and that it was, just silly to have a magician advising an emperor. But that happened all over the planet in the biggest empires that ever existed, right? So if these guys were just like loony, superstitious idiots, their advice probably would not have guided the British Empire, for example, to become like the most powerful empire in human history. And, at the time of ancient Egypt, that was the case as well. So what I'm getting at there is that magician is really an arcane term for neurodivergent person with, pattern recognition superpowers and parallel processing abilities and all of that sort of thing. So this idea of triangulation, this thing that I referenced earlier about the presidential candidates and how they have maximum contradiction. If it was just one of them, then you could say, oh, well, it's just a coincidence. But as I was doing the research for this last article on propaganda, the more I looked, it was deeper and weirder, and it went even further than I thought. The reason I noticed this is that I happened to catch a little bit of the Democratic primaries when Harris was debating Tulsi Gabbard, and she acknowledged that Biden was like connected to the KKK, and that she said she believed every one of his accusers, right? And this is a black woman, okay, that's important. And then when he picked her as his VP, it was only like a week later or something. It wasn't much later. She said, "It is an honor to serve beside this great man." And I was like, "Wait, what the fuck?" And a bit later, I brought this up with some liberal I knew, and they acted like it didn't happen. And I posted about it a few times, and people were acting like, what are you talking about? You're making that up. I mean, it's easy to find online, so that really was unsettling as hell for me. And then when I don't even know the order, this could have happened first. They marketed Biden as the antidote to Trump's racism. Biden is the most well-documented racist in the Democratic Party by far, like eulogizing the exalted cyclops of the KKK. He tried to solve the black unemployment problem by creating a bill that put them all in prison. He said, "I don't want my kids growing up in a racial jungle. Like, this is the guy you're going to solve racism with." And, with this repetition, I thought, this does not look coincidental. It's too weird. But what finally broke me was Trump, because they really pushed him during his first campaign as this CP, child predator hunter, that he was going to fix all that shit. And he's like the star of the Epstein files. His name appears like, I have the stats somewhere, I think it's like 3,800 times or some crazy shit like that. It might even be more. I don't know. It's in my article. If you don't follow me on Substack, you should. It's way more coherent than these streams because I can write it down and edit it. But yeah, so when I noticed that, I was like, okay, dude, they're doing this on purpose. That is scary as hell, because it, if true, means that they are planning these things really far in advance to set it up. And it's really hard to deny, right? I mean, Clinton was promoted as a feminist, like an advocate for feminism. And he's got all these grape accusations. And I mean, it's all of Obama. He was marketed as the solution to Bush's war hawking or whatever. And I think within 3 days of being in office, he did a drone strike that killed 350 civilians or something. And by the time he was out of office, he had killed 10 times as many civilians as Bush. And he had also unalived multiple U.S. citizens. 2 of them were teenagers without a trial, unconstitutional, illegal, unaliving with no due process. Right? I'm telling you guys, it's completely insane. And then you also can look at how every single vice president has hated the president above them. It's like this threat. Anyways. Don't want to get too far off track here. But yeah, so I noticed that. And I also noticed that people weren't processing it. Like, they just didn't even see it. It just didn't even happen. And I've done a lot of streams on neural gating, neural filtering, and how that all works. There's information in the Substack article, so I'm not going to get too deeply into that. But it has to do with this contradiction. And so the reason they use the president, triangulation again, you have the magician who has an objective, and then you need 2 points to create a stable structure, right? So the presidential candidate has nodes they can attach to in your being at the very base, the bottom of the pyramid. Instinct, the primate instinct to, the alpha male thing, the alpha monkey, right? So there's like a deep fundamental anchor in your limbic system, instinct connected, and then it is a attention focal point of conscious awareness at the other end. So it is like an optimal like node or a distribution hub for this cognitive dissonance that is basically the fundamental mechanism that they leverage for their propaganda. And it has a lot of uses, a lot of utility. It not only does it scramble reason in people, but when your identity is connected to some concept, your nervous system will do anything it can to protect that identity anchor, right? So, and up to and including actually editing your perceptions. So when I was confronting those people and saying blah 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 Harris, and they're like, "What? That didn't happen." They were staring right at the TV. They watched the debate. Literally did not even process. Their nervous system edited out the information before it even hit their conscious mind. And this is a crazy thing to think about because all of us have the potential to do this. The more that you become coherent, the more that you attenuate your default mode network and the rest of your neural gating mechanisms in your nervous system, the less you are prone to this kind of thing. But if you're doing it in any domain, you're not going to know about it. So it's a really crazy thing to realize. And for me, it's a tremendous motivational factor to put energy into ensuring that my neural gating system is properly attenuated. This is another thing I've talked about a lot. My theory about what's happened here is that our environment, once it tapped into the current of technology, has passed us in our evolutionary processes cognitively. So we have this outdated mechanism that served us in the past when we had more simple lives and we had more simple environments and we didn't have so much information to process, right? But at the current juncture, our environment has outpaced our evolution, our cognitive evolution, and that is being exploited and used against us pretty severely. Let me check back in with the chat. Good evening. And of course, as always, if you guys have any questions or subjects, we are still booking for our retreat events in the jungle in September, October, and November. And yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. October's filling up, so if you want to come then, you should shoot me an email so we can set up a video call. Yeah, so okay, the triangle in the Western esoteric tradition is used to constrain demons, to bind and control malevolent forces. The symbolism is explicit. The pyramidal architecture doesn't just stabilize, it imprisons. The masses aren't just supporting the apex, they're contained within a geometric cage. Their instincts and attention channeled along predetermined vectors to be deployed in the service of the will of the magician. And if the triangle is used to contain demonic forces and the eye in the triangle represents the 1%, what exactly are they communicating about themselves and to whom? And it's kind of a crazy thing because this stuff isn't really that hidden. If you understand the symbolism of the pyramid and like what's going on there, it tells you everything you need to know. And where did they put that symbol? What is their main tool that they use to control the world? Money. You know what I mean? The truth is hidden from no one. It really isn't. It's written on the wall. Signs, symbols, hints, and clues, the writings on the wall, the rest is up to you. The divine science of the ancients is really just an advanced understanding of natural systems. Recognizing that universal laws govern all domains and consciously engineering their systems according to those principles, as above, so below, microcosm, macrocosm. It is Luciferian, but not because it's demonic magic, but in the sense that they are usurping the genius of natural law or God's creation to engineer godlike control. This is what magicians actually do. They recognize universal principles and then apply them with precision across domains. Today we call magicians neurodivergent or twice gifted people. As above, so below, in modern terms, is a protocol for developing cross-domain pattern recognition, compression, and synthesis abilities. This is the real reason that English royals always had magicians as advisors. Engineering human systems according to natural structural principles is wisdom. It is exactly what civilization should do. They're doing the right thing the wrong way. Another instance of inversion of fundamental truth. And part of the reason that this alignment with natural law is so effective is that much of the work is done for them. The magician doesn't cause change through will so much as he turns what's already there to his advantage, recognizing existing forces and architectures and then triangulating them with his desired outcome so that the result unfolds with the certainty of a chemical reaction. The machine operates identically. It doesn't create your instincts. It engineers the informational geometry so that your evolutionary program, existing social structures, and manufactured stimuli converge to produce predictable psychological states. Fear, loyalty, paralysis, rage, as reliably as mixing acid and base will produce salt water. Salt and water. The outcome isn't forced, it's inevitable. Like an equation that must resolve to a specific value, like reagents that must produce a specific compound when combined under specific conditions. And so that's just a little excerpt from the upcoming article. I'm actually going to pull up the one that I just published. Most of my content on Substack is paid, but this one is free, so might as well. You know what? Why don't I share my screen too? I'll check in with the chat one more time, and we'll go through some of this. It's crazy, man. How this all works. And it's important to understand a thing about how when you are entrained with these natural cycles and patterns and you have an awareness of all that, that alignment kind of puts you in a position where you don't really have to do a whole lot of manipulation. What I'm getting at here is that a lot of people that are overly skeptical of the idea of empirical control, like they think the parameters are tighter than they, they don't realize how much of it is just derivative or emergent from the circumstances that are already there. And so the influence only has to be applied subtly and strategically in order to produce the results, because the whole trajectory, the developmental trajectory is already there. And it's just a matter of being aware of it and sort of triangulating with it. So here, let me fix this screen. Let's get into this. When I first published this, it did the worst of, it's picking up a little bit, but I was bummed about that because I really do think that this is important. And as far as I can tell, some of the information in this article is not available anywhere else. So, like an initiatory tradition passing down sacred knowledge, empires have transmitted the techniques of invisible influence across millennia through conquest, scholarship, and institutional continuity. For over 5,000 years, they've been refining the dark arts of mass manipulation, culminating in the diabolical grimoire of social engineering knowledge inherited by modern propagandists, now nearly perfected with industrial age technology. The ancient lineage of psychological warfare. From the marble columns of ancient Rome to the algorithmic feeds of modern smartphones, the architecture of manipulation has remained remarkably consistent, even as its technology has evolved. Propaganda, far from being a modern invention, is nearly as old as civilization itself. What has changed is not its fundamental nature, but its delivery mechanisms. The coins that once bore an emperor's face have become micro-targeted advertisements. The myths that once legitimatized empires now manifest as viral narratives on social media platforms. Today, advances in neuroscience and data analytics have given governments and institutions unprecedented tools to capture cognition, not merely to persuade, but to fundamentally rewire how populations perceive reality. This article is the first in a series that will trace the ancient roots of these techniques and examine how modern technology has transformed them into a systematic architecture of cognitive capture that operates at mass scale in real time and with terrifying precision. Egyptian pharaohs, ancient Chinese strategists, Roman emperors, and modern propagandists have deployed nearly identical mass psyops across millennia. The blueprints for their protocols were preserved and transmitted by institutional inheritance, the Catholic Church preserving Roman ideological control methods through adaptation. Scholarly rediscovery is in the Renaissance recovery of Greek and Roman texts on rhetoric, statecraft, and crowd manipulation, and strategic study, European empires through the modern era analyzing historical psychological warfare protocols. With governments and private firms across at least 48 countries spending tens of billions of dollars per year on computational propaganda, real-time polling, social media sentiment analysis, neuroscience consultants, cyber troops linked to state agencies in 62 nations, and professionalized strategic communications firms offering disinformation for hire globally. They have unprecedented capacity to track which narratives bypass critical thinking, measure emotional response patterns, optimize messaging for maximum psychological penetration, and adapt their strategies to shifting social dynamics in real time, optimizing social engineering operations for perfect strategic alignment. This article will unlock, we will reverse engineer the mechanisms that make modern propaganda so insidiously pernicious. To free ourselves from its influence, we must understand how it exploits the nervous system's built-in vulnerabilities and why Orwellian doublespeak techniques, conflating freedom with surveillance, protection with suppression, war with peace, friend with enemy, function as the foundational blueprint. This architecture can be detected across every domain of the control matrix. In the glaring contradictions of presidential candidates, in partisan narratives, in media messaging, and in policy frameworks. The multi-generational, long-term strategic psychological warfare with documented historical continuity challenges the conventional political dysfunction and bureaucratic incompetence explanations. It implies intentionality across generational time frames. They've been refining this for longer than most people have been alive. Well, than anyone's been alive. I need to go and edit that. That's not corruption or incompetence. That's multi-generational strategic planning at a level most people can't, and in most cases wouldn't even if they could, psychologically process. As an added bonus, in studying the neuroscience of propaganda, you'll gain profound insights into how your nervous system processes information. Understanding cognitive dissonance, neurological filtering, neural gating, and pattern recognition offers benefits that extend far beyond propaganda awareness. Enhanced self-awareness, improved memory, sharper critical thinking, better emotional regulation, and an enhanced ability to recognize and neutralize self-deception in every area of life. McCarthyism. All right, let me check in with the chat and see how you guys are doing. If I can get out of this. There we go. Hey. Nothing? All right, let's keep going then. I should probably zoom in, but I can't remember where those buttons are. So I apologize if the text is a bit small. In the 1950s, U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy spearheaded an anti-communist campaign under the pretense of protecting American freedoms. Standing on this ostensibly righteous platform, McCarthy and his allies suppressed... I need to fix that too. McCarthy and his allies proceeded to suppress freedom. Oh boy. McCarthy and his allies proceeded to suppress freedom in perfect alignment with the proverbial communist playbook. They persecuted citizens for their beliefs, created a climate of fear where dissent was viewed as treasonous, undermined democratic institutions, and destroyed careers through political accusations alone, sin probatione, which is without evidence. Using a diabolical misdirection-based propaganda strategy known as projection, he Trojan horsed the totalitarian threat he claimed to oppose right past the people and straight into power. Between 1947 and 1957, over 12,000 Americans were blacklisted, careers destroyed, hundreds were imprisoned, and 5,000 alleged homosexuals were purged from government. The legislative assault on freedom for your protection template. The Taft-Hartley Act 1947 gutted union organizing power under anti-communist pretense. The McCarran Internal Security Act authorized emergency detention of anyone likely to commit espionage or sabotage. President Truman vetoed it, warning that it would damage the reputation of the United States as a standard bearer for freedom, but Congress overrode him. The Communist Control Act simply outlawed an entire political party. In a move straight out of the Orwellian playbook, the U.S. government conflated freedom with suppression of freedom, and the American people accepted it for freedom, of course. What projection actually means in psychological terms. It was a classic example of an age-old propaganda technique known as projection. Despite having deep roots in antiquity, in the modern era, it was first formally recognized as a propaganda tactic in Nazi operations. In a psychological context, it is defined as accusing another person of the negative traits and behaviors that oneself possesses and exhibits. When I was in elementary school, teachers framed this period as a sort of momentary hiccup in the naive, still shell-shocked collective psyche of post-war America. The default assumption was that we had evolved beyond this sort of hysteria, and it had only happened due to the ignorance of the people, not because of some nefarious social engineering agenda, right? Looking back at the bemusement I felt contemplating those naive muggles of yesteryear provokes a sharply painful pang of irony. During the McCarthy era, 13% of Americans self-censored under threat of imprisonment, right? Today, despite facing only social consequences, the number has tripled to 40%. That's crazy and scary. In the space between McCarthyism and the present, the machine has refined its methods. It knows that subtlety is much more economical and efficient than force. The psychology of inversion propaganda. So the architecture of modern propaganda is unabashedly Orwellian, conflating opposites until truth and lie are confounded. Freedom through surveillance, security necessitates emergency detention, protection requires oppression. This strategy doesn't just obscure truth, it weaponizes cognitive dissonance in such a way that lies become self-substantiating. One of the goals here is to foment pathology known as collective confabulation, where groups unintentionally generate, share, and fiercely defend fabricated narratives to fill in gaps in their shared reality. Breaking this spell requires addressing the underlying social dynamics, emotional biases, priors, nervous system priors, which are like early formative experiences that the nervous system uses to create its generative models and to guide its predictive predictive processing. I'm like weirdly unsure that that's the correct term. It's got to be. Basically, like that's its editing software, that it decides like, oh, Harris just contradicted herself too much for our model. Our model is threatened, so the nervous system's going to edit that out. You know what I mean? Or Trump, Trumpsters obviously do this all the time as well. Anyone that's really invested in tribal identity, their nervous system is going to do this. And it explains so much, when you look out in the world and you're like, how people don't seem this dumb in their like day-to-day lives, but then yet how can they miss these things? That's it. They're not that dumb. Their nervous system is editing, and the stuff, sometimes things get past it, but it can mediate the meaning before it reaches the conscious mind to adapt it to like fit into your, generative model that your nervous system is trying to protect. Did I finish that sentence? The cognitive protocols, structural echo chambers that make misinformation feel universally resonant. Disabling the pathology effectively requires a strategic multi-tiered approach. Disrupt the social reinforcement. Collective confabulations thrive on group validation. When individuals mutually reinforce each other's fabricated memories, a false statement becomes the group's objective truth. Depolarize the environment, shift the focus from defending collective group identity to evaluating individual claims objectively. Encourage synchronous thinking. Require group members to reflect independently on information before engaging in collective discussions, reducing the herd mentality. Implement rigorous source monitoring. So we don't need to go through all of these, but the Socratic method one is actually worth talking about. And another thing, of course, is just the individual work of developing internal coherence. That's really the fundamental thing. Attenuating the default mode network. Transcendental experiences basically temporarily expose the individual node, like if we are a local renderer, a node in a holographic information system, and our consciousness is basically a local renderer, right? Like it's a field based thing. So when you open up, you are allowing a more holistic entrainment with the universal mind, with the collective field. And when you come back down to your baseline awareness, you don't come all the way back down. Every time you are sort of incrementally more entrained, with the larger consciousness, and also with your own being, because during these states there are changes in subsystem crosstalk in our nervous system, and our subconscious and conscious, and different pieces and parts of our cognitive apparatus are communicating in ways that they normally don't. And once you have established those pathways, they remain there, even if they're reduced when the ayahuasca wears off or the meditation is over, or whatever the case may be. So in a clinical setting, challenging confabulation head on often causes individuals to double down on the false belief to justify their reality. Now, earlier I forgot to get into this a little bit deeper, and I won't too much now because I think I'm going to bring it up again later in this article, but this is another purpose that the maximizing contradictions in presidential candidates serves, because it almost sounds contradictory, because they're trying to make you more rigid in one sense, but then more malleable in another sense. So the way to understand it is, it's like they want you in your lane, right? So if you're a liberal and that's your tribal identity, they're not going to do anything to threaten the tribal identity directly. And everything they do that creates conflict, like when they had the liberals embrace censorship. And when I was a young liberal, we hated the right because they were pro-censorship. And all they had to do was have Hillary Clinton and one other major politician on the left say we need censorship. And I just watched the entire left just do a fucking 180, like it hadn't been a foundational principle for their entire existence. And that malleability has come from this constant enforcement of, it's like enforced cognitive dissonance, I guess. So you know what I mean? The more they do that, the more in your lane you are, the more rigid you are in terms of that tribe. You double down on that tribal identity, but then there's still, it actually increases their ability at the same time to manipulate you within your lane, and you'll understand that better as this goes on. Let me check in with the chat again. What's going on, Denmark? I see we have a few more people here. Please do me a favor, you guys. We're demonetized. So we rely on the community for support. If you appreciate this content, consider becoming a patron. We have retreats coming up in the fall and winter. I also do consultations. So any of those things are a great way to support us. Also, don't forget to follow me on Substack if you don't already. I'm much more able to speak my mind there, which is nice. I would really like to just completely shift all my energy to that platform, but it's not that big yet, so I don't know if it's really feasible. Anyways, where were we at here? Cultivating cognitive awareness, breaking out of information silos. You guys probably know about all that. So how strategic inversion propaganda exploits your nervous system. The mechanism exploited is a fundamental vulnerability in human psychology. Once the human nervous system accepts a framework, contradictory evidence triggers cognitive dissonance. Rather than reassessing its position, the brain attempts to protect its existing framework by rationalizing the offending contradiction, or just editing it out completely. The discomfort of being wrong is psychologically more painful than maintaining the contradiction, so the mind filters the conflicting information. This creates a self-reinforcing psychological trap. Contradictory evidence doesn't dispel the illusion, it strengthens your commitment to it. So there's another article I've written, if you guys want to click the link, if If you go to Substack, you can do that. The 3-step inversion protocol. So the propaganda architecture exploits this ruthlessly through strategic inversion. The mechanism works in layers. Establish a threat. Communism will destroy freedom. Terrorism will destroy security. Illegal immigration will destroy order. Position yourself as the solution. Only we can protect you. Implement the exact threat you warned against. Destroy freedom, security, order. Right? That's what they do. Rinse and repeat until the population effectively has developed a Stockholm Syndrome-like collective pathology. They will passionately defend the very mechanisms that are enslaving them, proudly proclaiming themselves patriots for doing so. Any challenge to this framework triggers the cognitive dissonance response. The greater the contradiction, the more aggressively it must be defended, because acknowledging it would require confronting the entire edifice of manipulated belief. Even if the manipulation is recognized after a certain point, resistance would require admitting complicity, a cognitive cost most people are unwilling to pay. The neuroscience behind this is fascinating, and again, if you are subscribed on Substack, you can find lots of articles on that. The tactic did not end with McCarthy. 70 years of refinement have made it less visible and therefore more insidious. 9/11, U.S. Constitution gutted in 45 days, exactly on the same premises as the McCarthyism communist, the Red Scare thing, right? So following September 11, 2001, the USA Patriot Act was passed just 45 days later. 342 pages of totalitarian legislation that most members of Congress later admitted they didn't bother to read before signing into law. Framed as necessary for protecting freedom from terrorism, it authorized warrantless surveillance of Americans, indefinite detention sans due process, secret national security letters that bypassed the need for court orders, and unconstitutional sneak and peek searches. The Fourth Amendment, a cornerstone of American freedom, was functionally gutted once again in the name of freedom. Iraq and beyond. The pattern continued with Iraq. Americans were told that we needed to invade Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction and were therefore, you guessed it, a threat to American freedom. No WMDs were found. Nevertheless, over 200,000 Iraqi civilians were unalived, with some estimates placing the number closer to 1 million. Today, the alien enemy threatening American freedom is, with perfect irony, illegal aliens, justifying border militarization, mass surveillance, and indefinite detention in freedom's name, of course. The projection has become so blatant that it is manifesting in the rhetoric as wordplay. How presidential candidates hack your neural hierarchy. This is where it really starts to get wild. This projection strategic inversion protocol is dispersed throughout the control matrix, from policy initiatives to institutional narratives to media. But the density and concentration of these engineering elements is calibrated according to position in the attention hierarchy. So the more focal the attention point, the more densely the manipulation infrastructure is deployed there, which is why presidential candidates function as a perfect dual anchor point. They simultaneously exploit instinct at the base, primate, tribal, alpha male hierarchy, and generate cognitive dissonance at the apex, contradictions that divide, confuse, paralyze rational processing. Here are the case studies. Trump, marketed as a child predator hunter during his first campaign. Donald Trump's name is the most frequently appearing name in the Justice Department's Epstein document cache. A New York Times review identified over 38,000 references. I said 3,800 before. 38,000 references to Trump, his wife, or his Mar-a-Lago property across more than 5,300 files. In addition, Donald Trump has faced multiple accusations involving minors, though there is no single definitive number of complaints, as they span various civil lawsuits, FBI files, and public allegations. Obama was positioned as the anti-war moral alternative to Bush, while expanding drone warfare to 7 countries. After being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009, he executed 542 drone strikes, killing an estimated 3,797 people, including 324 civilians, 10 times more strikes than Bush. Obama authorized the assassination of American citizens without trial, bombed a Doctors Without Borders hospital, earning him the distinction of being the only Nobel Peace Prize laureate to bomb another Nobel Peace Prize winner. Obama himself reportedly told senior aides, "Turns out I'm really good at killing people. I didn't know that was going to be a strong suit of mine." God damn, dude. He vastly expanded targeted killing programs in non-battlefield settings across Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia. Biden was marketed as the solution to Trump's racism. As Senator Robert C. Byrd's memorial service in 2010, Biden delivered a eulogy where he referred to the former Ku Klux Klan organizer and Zoltan Cyclops as a mentor, guide, and dear friend. He also authored the 1994 crime bill that was designed to address the black unemployment issue by incarcerating millions and made numerous racist statements. Poor kids are just as bright as white kids. I mean, you got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. He dropped out of the Democratic race that round because of this comment that he said about Obama. I mean, or no, where were we? We're here. And stated on record, he didn't want his children growing up in a racial jungle. You guys remember how they marketed him? We got to get that racism out of the White House by putting this Klansman in there. Harris was marketed as a pillar of integrity despite the fact that after having on numerous occasions cited Biden's history of racism and sexual assault accusations, saying that she believed every one of Joe's 11 accusers, she accepted his nomination, saying it is an honor to serve beside this great man. Look, if you do that, that's like proof, unarguable proof that you do not have the integrity to be anywhere near any kind of position of power, period. You're done. You're gone. You know what I mean? Like, no one should have ever considered for a second voting for her or Trump, you know? But, like, come on, people. When it gets that bad, you don't just say, well, we gotta stick by our team or lesser of two evils or whatever the fuck. No, you have a revolution, you know? I mean, give me a fucking break, man. The thing is, it's not that people wouldn't do that if they understood what was happening. They literally cannot even perceive it. Most of them can't even fucking their nervous system will not let them. This is why, you know, certain people back in the day were trying to flood the world with a certain entheogenic molecule, you know, because it does help with this stuff, although it's so deeply ingrained. And this is something I don't know if I remembered to put in this article even, but one of the things about anchoring these nodes, you know, one of the main focal points or attention, focal points of attention at the apex and then to instinct is that it's such a high system relevance in the conscious domain, and it's so fundamental in your instinct that it sets a precedent for how your nervous system processes things across domains, right? So it's not just messing with you in your political window. It's fucking scrambling your brain in every fucking domain, right? I mean, it's crazy how brilliant it is, even. So it gets worse. Tulsi Gabbard confronted Harris on a debate stage about having kept people in prison beyond their sentences for cheap labor for the state, which is like a black woman keeping people, you know, that's basically state-sanctioned slavery that she participated in as a black woman. And this is the Democrats, you know, we got to get rid of the evil. Yeah, you dumb motherfuckers. What? You know, sorry, I shouldn't be so rude. I just got done saying that they're not, but it makes me mad, man, sometimes when I say shit like that. She withheld evidence that would have freed innocent defendants. This one guy was so traumatized. He did like 30 years for a murder he didn't commit. She knew it. And just because she didn't want to lose face for having prosecuted someone that keep this innocent man in prison for 30 fucking years. And when he got out, he would pick up his cigarette butts and put them in a plastic bag and take them with him. And his lawyer asked him, why do you do that? And he's like, I'm not letting them frame me again. You know, I mean, horrific. This woman belongs, in my opinion, for that. Like, if the death penalty is a thing that should ever happen, like, she is totally 100% eligible. You know, I mean, that is horrific. And who knows what else she did that we didn't find out about? You know, I mean, every single case that she ever prosecuted should be reopened now that we know that she's capable of some shit like that. You know, and can you imagine having your eyes open and watching all these liberals like, you know, she's so wonderful and a pillar of integrity and shit. And I was just going like, holy fuck, we're done, man. We're done. The human race is just toast. We're just toast. and then the Trumpers are at least as insane. It's anyways, let's moving right along. And she laughed about smoking marijuana, having prosecuted 1,956 people for possession of the good herb, 45 of which were sent to state prisons. A black woman, proud to serve beside a man she believed was a racist sexual predator, while also participating in forced prison labor, or more bluntly, modern slavery, for the people in the back. Like, for real, y'all. Come on, man. We can't be putting up with this anymore. I mean, that's crazy, right? That is insane. That these are the people that, people are like, how can you cast a ballot for these fucking people? I mean, how could you with good conscience, like, I wouldn't want to breathe in the same room as Harris or Trump, I don't want that energy getting in me. The psychological function. This pattern serves multiple strategic purposes. Reality processing breakdown. When populations accept obvious contradictions, they lose capacity for logical analysis. If Biden can be anti-racist while eulogizing KKK members, if Trump can fight pedophiles while being Epstein's best friend, if Harris can represent reform while blocking exonerations, then words mean nothing and evidence doesn't matter. By the way, you guys, please help me share this stuff manually because the algorithm does not push anything I do. And I've fucked up and said several words that I shouldn't have said in the course of this. So, if you think this is important, help me spread because the algorithm's not gonna do that. Learned helplessness. Confronting contradictions is blatant, and being told you're crazy for noticing them creates psychological paralysis. People either accept the contradictions, breaking their reasoning, reject it and become conspiracy theorists, which results in social isolation, or disengage entirely, political apathy. All three outcomes neutralize resistance, right? This is really what the Epstein files are about, because if you think about the fact that the FBI has had this stuff for, decades, a lot of it, and nobody was arrested. And then they put this guy in the White House that is the star of the files by far. And there's people try to say oh, well, they're just both billionaire, whatever, dude. What about this girls softball team that said he would walk in there while they were naked? And, there's just so much stuff. The way he's touched his daughter, there's videos of it that are just absolutely stomach turning. There couldn't be more evidence that this dude is, P3DO, hard, he's going hard with that shit. And, where the fuck was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So the learned helplessness thing, it's not about prosecution or justice. People wow, they released the Epstein files. So what? What are you going to do? The fuck are you going to do? What are you going to do? Nothing. You're not going to do anything. The FBI didn't do anything. You don't release evidence when there's an ongoing investigation and an intent to prosecute. You don't do that. You do that after you've either dropped the charges or you've gotten a conviction. That's where we're at with this. So you can rule that out. It's not about justice. It's not about exposing anyone. They don't care. They don't care. They set Trump up to play this role a long time ago, decades ago. It's all orchestrated. There's no way it's not. If you look at the evidence I'm presenting here, the way it built up to it, the way they marketed him as the anti-pred guy, and then they knew they were going to expose the fact that he's all throughout the files. Why'd they do that? This is why they did that. Learned helplessness. What the fuck are you going to do? And they're telling people you're worthless too, because we can do whatever we want to your kids for as long as we want. And there ain't shit that's going to happen to us. Look, we can even tell you about it and you ain't going to do nothing. The most heavily armed population in the world is not going to do a fucking thing. Watch this. And then they dropped this shit and nobody did anything. Right? Learned helplessness. Tribal override of evidence. The contradictions are so extreme that accepting them requires tribal loyalty to override observable reality. Those who can hold these contradictions have demonstrated complete epistemic surrender to the tribe. They've proven they'll believe anything authority tells them regardless of evidence. Moral inversion training. Progressives defending a segregationist, eulogizing crime bill architect, segregationist eulogizing crime bill architect, racist crime bill architect, I should have put. Conservatives defending an Epstein associate, that's putting it mildly, isn't it? criminal justice advocates defending a prosecutor who hid evidence. Each group learns their principles are negotiable when tribal identity is threatened. Populations engineered for consent rather than principle become infinitely manipulable. Why maximum contradiction? Choosing maximally contradictory candidates isn't a matter of incompetence. It's about conditioning populations to abandon reason, making all subsequent manipulation, gun control, value malleability, authority worship easier because logical consistency has already been destroyed. Man, explaining this stuff so clearly is why they want to give me bloody body by pumping a couple of slugs inside me. Moderate contradiction allow people to rationalize. Everyone makes mistakes. People change. Nuanced positions. Maximum contradictions force a complete epistemic break. You either surrender your reasoning capacity or you reject the entire system. Those are your choices. That's all you got. Nothing left. This candidate contradiction technique serves a deeper purpose than loyalty testing. It manufactures mutual threat perception through provocative selective perception. This creates self-reinforcing partisan division where both sides are factually correct about their opponents while remaining blind to their own puppet's contradiction due to identity protective neural filtering mechanisms. That's it, So, in other words, you have the liberals going like, look at this like P3DO fucking totalitarian dictator that all of the right are, cheering this fucking dude on. They're supposed to be the freedom flag waving, they're bootlicking fucking, they got all the guns in the world. They said they wanted to get rid of all the CP, predator types, and they know where the king of them is, and they're fucking worshiping him. And then on the other side, you got the liberals going, we want to get rid of racism by putting this Klansman in the White House. The other side can see your bullshit, but you can't see your own bullshit. You know what I mean? It's literally being edited out. That's what the fuck they're exploiting. And all of this contradiction, all of this shit that they're doing exponentially, enhances those tendencies. It encourages that shit in the sheeple fool. So, factually correct about that, but yeah. God damn y'all. Moderate hypocrisy, flawed but trying, allows people to maintain some principle-based reasoning. Maximum inversion forces a complete surrender. So you can't defend Obama's drone record on anti-war principles. You must abandon anti-war principles. You can't defend Clinton on feminist principles. You must abandon feminist principles. You can't defend Trump on anti-corruption principles. You must abandon anti-corruption principles. Each defense requires principle abandonment, training populations to value tribe over truth. What is that setting up? What is that setting up? What have I been telling you guys about how there's a uniparty coming? And years ago, you can check me on this, go back 7 fucking years on this channel. And I told you before I had ever done any research on any of this shit, just from observation, when we start to see them mixing up the principles from the two parties, we know the shit is about to hit the fan. So when the left pivoted on censorship and all the other stuff that's happened, I was like, oh fuck. I wish I was wrong, but I wasn't wrong. This creates identity malleability. Values will flip on command because they were never anything more than team colors. The systematic inversion serves multiple functions. Epistemic destruction at scale. When every major figure embodies the opposite of what they represent, populations lose the ability to map symbols to reality. Words become completely detached from meaning. Anti-war means drone strikes. Feminist means sexual predator. Reform means hiding evidence. Demoralization. Those who notice the contradictions experience profound demoralization. If the good guys are perfectly inverted from their stated values, resistance is futile. This foments learned helplessness and apathy, both of which are antithetical to revolutionary fervor. Selection for compromise. Candidates with maximum contradiction in their character also tend to have skeletons in their closets, making them maximally controllable. They're vulnerable to exposure, dependent on institutional protection, and, another typo, and are unlikely to challenge power in cases where a person with actual principles might resist elite directives. In other words, presidential candidates are deliberately chosen according to whoever is the biggest piece of shit that they can find floating in their pool. That's a fact. Loyalty testing. Getting partisans to defend these inversions tests and reinforces tribal loyalty over principle. If you'll defend Obama's drone war as peacekeeping, Clinton as a feminist, and Trump as anti-P3DO, you've proven you're epistemically captured. You'll believe anything your tribe requires of you. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. 1984, George Orwell. Let me check in with the chat again. Yo, 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 I don't see anything. We've had 101 people come in here and 13 people stayed? Really? Like, I know this is one of the best articles on propaganda that there is. At least, you know, in the context of like all the stuff that's going on right now. You guys help me get this shit out there, man. People need to know. You know, like I put so much time into laying this down so that like you really can't argue. You know, there's not much room to. I mean, if you can argue, put it in the chat. If you think I'm wrong about any of this stuff, please enlighten me. But I'm pretty sure that this all would stand up in court. Making populations accept that Biden fights racism while eulogizing KKK leaders. Trump fights pedophilia while being a central figure in the Epstein files. Harris, God damn it, I said it again. Harris fights prosecutorial abuse while committing it, grooms the population for submission to power, not just regardless of contradiction, but because of it. The dual engine architecture, triangulating conscious attention, instinct, and influence. Man, I wish I had some water, but I don't. Sorry, guys. I need some paste, man. For those of you that might not be aware, I live at almost 13,000 feet in the Andes, and there's no oxygen up here. So after about an hour, I start to get kind of woozy and brain gets slow. So it's a necessary. It's not evil. It's good medicine, but it's not polite during live streams. Coca oxygenates the blood. Kind of the punchline there. Great. I really need water, man. We have to boil it, and I didn't put any on earlier. Okay. Man, I really need water. I almost want to go downstairs and just let you guys chill for a minute so I can grab some water. Like you hear my throat? Like it's not good. Actually, I'm going to do that. I have to. Sorry, guys. I'll be back. It was still hot, which is not great, but I did get some water. Checking with the chat one more time before we jump back into the article. Yeah, I got the water. Thank you. Please do consider supporting the channel. Speaking of the altitude, we are trying to get out of here, move to the coast. So it is a great time to support us. And people have asked me, like, if you have to chew coke all the time to maintain up there, what about when you're sleeping? I feel like hammered dog shit when I wake up every day. Not even kidding. It's terrible. And I sleep way more than I should. If nobody wakes me up, I'll just not wake up. Really. I wonder if I would wake up at all sometimes. But yeah, anyways, we are planning to go to where the air is down there. The dual engine architecture, triangulating conscious attention, instinct, and influence. Presidential candidates function as bidirectional anchor points that create a sort of loop between two layers of neural processing. Conscious attention at the apex of the pyramid and instinct at the base. Once that loop is established, the machine has triangulated you. The machine front loads maximum contradiction into it. Branding and behavior violently collide. Supposed saviors of freedom erode civil liberties. Anti-corruption crusaders preside over graft. And law and order candidates are flagrantly criminal. Elections determine survival context. High emotional stakes demand your conscious attention, and high existential stakes, plus the primacy of hierarchical tribal primate instincts, place elections at the apex of the nervous system's organizational hierarchy. In other words, because the focal point is so fundamental, it occupies a position of such high system relevance that the protocol the nervous system uses to manage the cognitive dissonance is applied globally. So over repeated cycles, the way the brain resolves these high-stakes prediction errors, how it justifies, filters, and defends around a candidate, does not remain confined to politics. It sets precedents that the nervous system generalizes, literally shaping your perception across domains. And this is why when you do cognitive hygiene exercises and brain optimization in whatever, supplements, psychedelic experiences, therapeutic modalities, whatever it is, it doesn't have to be focused on this stuff. That's why psychedelics were illegal. That's why people make fun of, spirituality, or the machine makes fun of it, encourages people to dismiss it. Because when you create a more unified framework in any one of the windows, any different window domains, whatever, there's a global effect because the brain is a holonomic system, right? So if you have a neural hub that has information in it and you create lesions in that neural hub, the information that was specifically stored there is still present, although deteriorated, but still present globally throughout the rest of the network. So every time you fix your perception in any area, all of this other stuff is affected. And the more fundamental the perceptual aberration that you harmonize, or however you want to think of it, the more impact it has. That's why they've chosen strategic inversion. It's very strategic. So neural filtering. You see only what your nervous system expects. Neural filtering is essential to maintaining the illusion. When the nervous system's generative models are threatened by dissonance, it acts like a custom content filter for, in this case, your tribal identity. You remember information that is consistent with your nervous system's expectations regarding your side and dismiss or literally fail to notice information that contradicts it. Each camp only sees what it expects. Its own candidate's contradictions get filtered out or rationalized away, while the other side's contradictions appear blindingly obvious, insane, even unforgivable. And all of this neural filtering occurs before conscious processing. You ain't going to see what you don't want to know. Black Third Wind, Grateful Dead, Weir Barlow. Candidates as interface nodes. From the machine's perspective, the candidate is an interface that is used to hack your nervous system, An engineered node positioned where informational density concentrates, system relevance, emotional charge, repetition, tribal identification all converge at the apex of this triangle. Through that node, it can connect to instinct. Actually, I didn't word that very well, did I? Because it's not that node. It's the other node. So through the other node, it can connect to instinct, fear, rage, loyalty, submission, and conscious awareness, values, ideals, facts, and tie them together into a self-reinforcing neural circuit. The apex, the conscious processing, doesn't question the base instinct, the neural filtering. It works full time as a spin doctor defending what the base has already decided. And think about this. This focal point of attention at the apex, they call the president. They literally call the people that vote for him his base. Fuck around and find out. You know what I mean? Like, they don't hide any of this. None of it is hidden. In fact, it's better that you see it. Because your brain, before you even have a chance to process it and use it, it's actually going to reinforce the architecture that they're trying to create in your nervous system. Wild, right? What later became triangulation in surveying and navigation, the determination of a position by measuring angles between three reference points, was the mathematical formalization of something much older. Centuries earlier, certain esoteric traditions had discovered that three-point geometrical configurations can be deployed as a containment technology. The triangle used to constrain demons is not a cartoon superstition. It is a recognition that when you define three fixed points and you create a bounded solution space. Within that space, movement is constrained, position is overdetermined, and escape is structurally impossible. Modern propaganda applies this triangulation architecture to the psyche. Your evolutionary instinct, the candidate as hypersalient stimulus, and a target psychological state are treated as the three corners of a behavioral triangle. Once these are fixed by reputation, emotional charge, and social stakes, your nervous system is not free in any meaningful sense inside that configuration. It will resolve toward loyalty, fear, or paralyzed ambivalence with the same inevitability that a measured triangle resolves to a single location on a map. And we will get into all of the mathematics of that and how this actually works in terms of like system theory and like geometrical architecture and whatnot in the next article. The eye in the triangle on the dollar bill isn't just a symbol of empire. It is a diagram of its methodology, the geometric technology of containment. And what's being contained isn't some demonic spirit called forth from some goetic grimoire. It's the unpredictable, volatile energy of millions of human nervous systems constrained inside an informational architecture that channels their instincts and attention along predefined vectors. The result at the societal level is chronic conditioning and cognitive fragmentation. Studies on the effects of cognitive dissonance on political attitudes show that once individuals rationalize a choice, they become more extreme, more certain, and less open to corrections. But this rigidity applies mostly to tribal identity. The inversions must be deployed strategically. Once the nervous system is conditioned to sustain cognitive dissonance, a paradoxical dual state emerges, increasing rigidity, in-lane selection, right? So tribal loyalty, partisan identity paired with increasing malleability within that lane, beliefs, values, principles, and policy positions. The tribal anchor calcifies, I am a Democrat. But everything downstream of that anchor becomes increasingly reprogrammable as long as the identity anchor itself remains unthreatened. So long as the self-concept and sense of tribal belonging are maintained, they can toggle everything else. Positions on censorship, civil liberties, military intervention, economic policy can be inverted on short order without triggering an identity dissolution defense response. The rigidity and malleability aren't contradictory. They're engineered for mutual reinforcement. You're not abandoning your identity when your values invert. You're demonstrating loyalty by evolving with the group. Herd conformity instincts, which are deeply connected to our survival instincts, safety and numbers, also play a substantial role in this scenario. The individual doesn't recognize this as brainwashing. They rationalize it as societal evolution or the maturation of collective morality. The cognitive dissonance architecture prevents them from seeing that their current position directly contradicts foundational values that they've held for decades, even generations. Memory is conveniently elastic and even rewritable, and therefore facilitates adaptation without embarrassment. We always cared about safety over absolute, or absolute. Man, why did I write that? It should be free speech. That's weird. The context is different now. I've matured in my thinking. The illusion of autonomy. The cognitive dissonance propaganda renders identity itself infinitely reprogrammable while maintaining the illusion of autonomous development. So populations conditioned through cognitive dissonance tolerance can be identity shifted across domains: politics, morality, epistemology, even foundational human rights. The system is designed to be self-reinforcing. If you're still not convinced, just look around you. They have cranked the dial on the strategic inversion machine. The masses are responding exactly as this framework, the framework presented here, predicts. Their brains have literally been scrambled. Sorry, not sorry. The psychological inversion. The machine doesn't broadcast the same inversions to everyone. It micro-targets emotional triggers to match specific personality types, ensuring each demographic receives the version most likely to bypass their critical thinking, promote cognitive dissonance, confuse, depersonalize, and demoralize their targets. The distribution of partisan narratives is algorithmically determined by psychological profile. The right doesn't receive anti-gun messaging because they're bitch-made bootlickers cosplaying resistance while celebrating every police shooting, surveillance expansion, and federal crackdown on protesters they disagree with, despite rhetoric celebrating the Second Amendment, a bulwark against tyranny, and claiming to favor smaller governments. Heavily armed conservatives constantly demand larger police forces, military budgets, and prison systems. If elites genuinely feared armed right-wing populations, the anti-gun propaganda, this might be the most important thing in this entire article. If elites feared armed right-wing populations, the anti-gun propaganda would be aimed at them instead of at the left. The fact that it isn't suggests these groups are viewed as aligned with the existing power structure. The left, the demographic that might actually resist, gets psychologically customized disarmament propaganda, appeals to empathy, child safety, social responsibility. By leveraging empathy via harm reduction frameworks to create moral objections to armed self-defense, they ensure that the demographics most capable of institutional coordination and ideological coherence have the lowest gun ownership at 19 to 26%. The right is fed constant narratives about big government tyranny while cheering expanded surveillance, militarized police, and executive power, as long as it happens under the direction of their team. The left receives messaging about protecting democracy while supporting censorship, corporate government fusion, the exact institutional consolidation they claim to oppose. All that is needed is to frame things in a way that convinces them that it's in their best interest. It's not about left or right. It's a bilateral operation, exploiting each tribe's psychological vulnerabilities so that both sides are neutralized as threats to consolidated power. The left disarms voluntarily because of moral conviction. The right arms itself in the name of freedom and liberty while simultaneously demanding expansion of the control matrix in every domain. The left's empathy and social justice orientation, traits that historically fuel resistance to tyranny, become weaponized against them through appeals to collective safety and harm reduction. When progressives identify ICE detention as tyranny or police violence as state oppression, their response when asked what they plan to do about it, I'm going to vote for a different puppet master in like 3 years, exposes the success of the propaganda. They've been conditioned to view armed resistance as morally equivalent to the tyranny they oppose. This creates paralysis in the very demographic most ideologically opposed to authoritarianism. Both sides demonstrate such extreme value malleability that their stated principles are revealed to be theater. Check in with the chat one more time. What's going on, Dan? Oh, did I not? Oh, I did. That's odd. Oh, there it is. The value collapse. The left's free speech reversal is staggering. The same demographic that championed the Berkeley free speech movement now champions deplatforming, content moderation, and misinformation censorship. They shifted from "I disapprove of what you will say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it" to free speech as violence within a single generation. It wasn't even a single generation. It was like a day. This wasn't gradual political drifting spanning decades. It was rapid reorientation in response to elite institutional messaging from a few politicians, universities, tech platforms, and mainstream media. The right's freedom rhetoric versus authoritarian worship is equally absurd. Don't tread on me. Flags fly alongside demands for militarized police, mass incarceration, and expanded surveillance state powers. They fetishize constitutional rights while cheering extrajudicial deportations, celebrating police brutality against protesters, and demanding tech companies censor content they dislike. The contradiction is so blatant that it can only persist through sustained and forced incoherence, which results from engineered cognitive dissonance. Both sides of the aisle have already surrendered autonomous thought. The left thinks tyranny respects Robert's rules of order. The right thinks freedom means worshiping authority. Both populations are so psychologically captured that neither represents much of a threat regardless of armament. The machine thrives on incoherence. The system sustains itself by perpetuating and forced incoherence. The propaganda system functions by fragmenting perception, leveraging instinct against conscious awareness, severing cause from effect, obfuscating information in a way that discourages pattern recognition across domains. Your worldview becomes a collection of incompatible modules that never communicate and never finding resolution. Developing internal coherence through cognitive training can close the gaps in perception. Developing the capacity to recognize structural patterns through intellectual development, contemplative practices, psychedelic experiences, and dialectical thinking will allow you to perceive the geometrical patterns that underlie apparently disconnected phenomena. Default mode network attenuation through psychedelic or transcendental practices disrupts the neural architecture that maintains these perceptual blind spots. The DMN enforces categorical thinking, maintains the illusion of separate self, and reinforces conditioned response patterns, the same fragmentation the propaganda system exploits. Hegelian dialectical thinking involves training the mind to hold thesis and antithesis simultaneously without collapsing into premature synthesis. Consciously holding opposing ideas like my candidate represents working people and my candidate serves the elite in awareness simultaneously, your neural filtering architecture loses structural integrity. The truth is hidden from no one. Eliphas Levi, Transcendental Magic. They're not hiding the architecture. They're counting on your ability not to see it coherently. Inability to see it coherently. The strategic inversions, the contradiction maximization, the learned helplessness psyops, it's all plainly visible. What prevents recognition isn't secrecy, it's perceptual fragmentation maintained through cognitive dissonance, tolerance training. You know that your candidate contradicts his purported values, that your party inverted its principles, that the system produces outcomes that are polar opposites of its stated purpose, and still cannot see the coherent pattern because each contradiction occupies a separate cognitive module that never communicates with the others. The future of cognitive capture, AI-generated disinformation. Generative AI now allows the production of persuasive content at scale previously unimaginable. Deepfake videos, AI-generated text, and synthetic voices can be deployed to create false narratives that are nearly indistinguishable from authentic content. This represents a qualitative shift in the propaganda architecture. Previously, producing persuasive fake content required significant resources, writers, production team, distribution networks. Now, a single actor can generate thousands of persuasive messages optimized for specific audiences in any language and at minimal cost. Neurotechnology and direct cognitive intervention. Emerging neurotechnology raises the possibility of more direct forms of cognitive capture. Neural interfaces, brain stimulation techniques, and pharmaceuticals could soon be deployed to influence neural processing directly. That's already happening, I think, but, while this may sound science fiction, research on transcranial magnetic stimulation has demonstrated that non-invasive brain stimulation can influence decision-making, emotional responses, and memory formation. There are ways to obstruct that, by the way, and colloidal gold is one of them. As these technologies advance, the question is not whether they will be used for cognitive manipulation, but how. Research on these same technologies as healing modalities is underway at major institutions all around the world. So they can be used either way, to create more incoherence or to create coherence. And there's I think the source there is the papers on this research. But Stanford Medical, using golden ratio based ultrasound oscillations, they realized that they could increase just general coherence in the brain by exposing it to golden ratio based ultrasound oscillations. So I don't want to get too deeply into what exactly that means here, but basically it means undoing the cognitive influence, the damage that's been done by exposure to our society, really. Let's see. Okay, dismantling the architecture. The dark art of propaganda is not a relic of the ancient past or dystopian future. It is an evolving system operating in our present moment. Understanding the architecture is the first step toward defending against it. The ancient Romans used myth, orations, monuments, and coins to shape perceptions. Modern systems use algorithms and neuroscientific insights to engineer cognition at scale. The techniques have evolved, but the fundamental goal remains the same: to neutralize the population's capacity for autonomous thought. Recognizing the patterns is itself a defense. When we understand the neural mechanisms that propaganda, confirmation bias, emotional hijacking, cognitive dissonance overload, we can promote countermeasures, media literacy, emotional and psychological awareness, and cognitive hygiene practices. The architecture has been thoroughly mapped, and mapping is the first step toward dismantling it. My work revolves around this problem, and you can read all kinds of shit like that on my Substack account. In the next segment of this series, we'll explore the esoteric roots of propaganda and social engineering. Esoteric knowledge in this context is really just advanced understanding of natural law and human psychology. One of the things I didn't mention earlier is that the mystery traditions that they, what's the word? They penetrated to learn how to do all this stuff 5,000 years ago, or, at least, the pharaohs, yeah, you could say at least 5,000 years ago. Certainly in Rome, we have records that they did this. They sent a magistrate who had the title of Archon. This is where the Gnostics get the concept for their entity. It's an allegory for these actual humans that obstructed the spiritual development of mankind by penetrating the mysteries, stealing the secrets, and then sabotaging them and handing them over to the empires, which was not good, obviously. Oh, but those were shamanic traditions, basically. There were, the Kaikian, there are altered states involved in these mystery traditions. And that gave people like, say, John Dee, who was advising Queen Elizabeth, let's assume he was a neurodivergent genius that had, incredible pattern recognition and, polymath, all these things. And he's, taking God knows what in Europe. We don't know exactly what was used in the various traditions. We know some things: henbane, mandrake, cannabis, hashish, opium. I suspect that the Kaikian actually contained rue and acacia, and there's actually finally evidence for that, if indirectly, because harmalas were found in a ceremonial vase in an Egyptian ceremonial chamber a couple of years ago. And if there had been DMT in there as well, it's not stable enough, so it wouldn't be detected. So that's at least a little bit of anecdotal evidence in favor of my theory about that. But either way, this advanced understanding of human psychology is the other thing that they leverage. So it's a combination of advanced psychological understanding that I think was derived from mystery tradition, altered state experiences, and advanced knowledge and application of natural law. So yeah, that's what's coming up next. Whoa, I didn't see we got all these comments here. I'll have to go back and read those later. So, something else I was thinking about getting into, but let's see what time it is, and I'll check in with the chat once again. Okay, so I don't see any questions, comments, subjects, whatever in the chat. I don't understand why. Here, let me see. Oh, okay, there we go. My lag is so bad that the stream's like 45 minutes behind where it actually is here. So yeah, I'll give you guys a few minutes if you have anything that you would like me to weigh in on. Otherwise, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, follow me on Substack. Yeah, wild, right? And it's just going to keep getting crazier, you know? And that's the thing that we have to bear in mind is that this triangulation is used across domains, right? So in like the developmental trajectories of their agendas, we're going to see it too. So this is all going somewhere, you know, and you kind of have to analyze it from those terms. You know, it starts out as like more vague, which you could think of as wide. And then as we approach, you know, greater concision in the agenda or the convergence of vectors, that's the realization of it. And you know what I mean? You kind of map the trajectory to figure out where it's going. And what that obviously is staging a totalitarian uniparty situation. You know, this is, if you go back, the video is called The Eye of Horus. I made it like 7 years ago. And I was like, look, this is what it's going to look like. This is why, this is how. I had done no research at the time. It was just like observing it and informed by my understanding of these old mystery tradition principles, I guess, you know, the teachings of the Arcanum. Talk more on the triangle as, yes, that's something that actually exists around the world too. And this is one of the ways that the knowledge of it's how we separate the wheat from the chaff, kind of. When you see these things that are present in disparate cultures that have no connection, that are consistent, then you go, okay, well, that's probably legit, you know, in terms of like metaphysics and esoteric knowledge and whatnot. So for example, I have been initiated into the Western mystery tradition and also into ayahuasca traditions. And in both cases, there is a circle that represents the microcosm of the shaman or the magician. It's his responsibility or her responsibility to maintain the energy within that circle and to determine, you know, what happened. They're basically God of that universe. Usually the four directions are acknowledged, or the four elements, or both, creating a square within that center. During the any like I don't know if orations is the right word, but when we speak, we generally go to the middle of the circle, or if you're doing a lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you go to the center of the circle. So if you consider that the knowledge comes from nature, right? So the Luciferian interpretation of this, we're usurping the God's knowledge that it used to construct the universe in order to make gods of ourselves over our own domain, right? And I don't really consider it usurping. I think this is what we're supposed to do. The only reason that I'm inclined to use that language probably is that I have a sort of apologist, like a subconscious apologist disposition due to the culture that I grew up in. You know what I mean? Like, I shouldn't say that at all because it's not how I think about it. But yeah, so you have the four fundamental forces of physics, the four elements, and then you have these triangles that constrain forces that are, if you have the magician standing in the center, and you draw a line from the first element or fundamental force or whatever, the corner of the square, the point where the two lines intersect, to the head, the third eye of the magician in the center, you get a pyramid, and there's consciousness at the top. Until you did that, that circle and square were just a 2D flat plane that represented inert potential. Once you introduce consciousness and connect it to those four fundamental forces, you have a habitable fucking, real 3D universe. So that is the original meaning of this. Turning the electromagnetic fields that originally constituted the walls of the pyramid in the ritual into stone is also symbolic, right? Because they have like trapped things in this rigid, frozen fucking, structure. So that's one level of it. In esoteric and theosophical literature, the triangle is the geometric expression of a ternary. The principle that any stable manifestation arises from three factors rather than two: thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So you see the Trinity throughout esoteric systems, religions. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or you have Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And this is partly due to the need for stability. And so when you have 3 points, you get the first possible polygon. It's both structurally stable and energetically directional. So it often encodes processes like ascent and descent or manifestation. So the pentagram, for example, is basically made of triangles. And there are also golden ratio triangles, which is the fundamental blueprint that everything in the universe, and not just physical systems or architectures like spiral galaxies and seashells, but also weather patterns. And the more advanced our technology gets, we've been able to spot golden ratio related proportions in cookbooks and shit. Like, we don't even have to do it deliberately. It just emerges from everything because it's the single underlying architecture that everything is generated with. And there's a term, recombinatorial differentiation, which in biology, chemistry, bunch of different, all the domains, really, probably. I think at the most fundamental level of physics, they're finding this as well. It's like you have like Leibniz's concept of monads, where there was like a almost like a byte, little data point, that were like the fundamental things, the building blocks, and then they're combined with different in different configurations, and that's what generates all the different stuff, all the different things, So, yeah, the pentagram that has a descending point is actually a symbol of the descent of light into matter. It's not necessarily just overtly evil. A lot of people interpret it that way, but it's evil if you're like Gnostic and you think it's evil to exist. But if you like living, then it's just a symbol of the descent of light into matter and the crystallization of form from energy. And if the point is going upwards, then it's a symbol of the redintegration of that light back into its source, from the matter back into source. And it's interesting to note that matter is basically light in a standing wave. It's frozen light. And that concept exists in Hermetic magic from hell a long time ago, and also the Kabbalah and a lot of other systems. So this, has basically been confirmed by modern physics, and it's, pretty ubiquitously present in esoteric systems. So let's see. Some of the triads are like spirit, soul, body, will, love, intelligence, creation, preservation, destruction, birth, making it a kind of universal slot into which local systems plug their own trinities. And so again, that transpositionableness or something, I don't know what that capacity, or capacity for transposition that we were talking about in terms of like systems architecture and societal architectures and psychological manipulation, triangulation, and you can plug the symbol into any different other symbolic system. And noticing things like that, which is again basically a function of pattern recognition, clues you in to its transposition in the real world, right? This is the real power that symbols have. It's not the symbol. The symbol doesn't have some magical influence. It's about understanding the application of the concept that is embodied and knowing how to apply it and arrange it and deploy it in the same way that it is deployed in the architecture of the system that created it. If that makes sense. So yeah, I don't want to give away the whole farm. I'm looking at my notes for the article I'm actually writing right now on this. So conveniently, they happen to be right here. I mean, you guys know about the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, I'm sure. So the triangle is a tool to localize and vectorize subtle forces. You're not just invoking, you're specifying what direction the working flows. Sanskrit yantra systems built almost everything out of triangles, especially in Sri Chakra, Sri Yantra, and related forms. So upward triangles are the Shiva principle consciousness, static witness, masculine. Downward triangle is Shakti, principle energy, dynamic feminine. And again, that relates to the same as the same concept as the light descending in the Hermetic tradition or the Kabbalah, or ascending, the upward triangle of consciousness, static witness, so the universal mind, just the field, the photon, the masculine, like a light sperm, and then downward triangles, matter, energy, dynamics, interlocking fields of triangles, the entire cosmos as interplay of consciousness and energy, generating planes, deities and subtle centers. And the interlocking triangles are actually a fundamental symbol in Freemasonry. The chapter in the Book of Lies that contains in fairly explicit language the secret to unlocking all of the symbolism of the entire Masonic and Western occult tradition is in chapter 69 of the Book of Lies, the way to suck seed and the way to suck eggs. And that is all I have to say about that. Wait, what? Okay, so yeah, it's not just structural. It's about how, in the Indian system, how pranic currents self-stabilize and how yantras are engineered as energetic devices. In multiple traditions, pretty much across the board, triangles are symbols of perfection or completion. 3 is the first whole figure. Harmony and balance between polarities. So even in the Christian system of the Trinity, one of the functions of the Son is mediating the Father, right? Wisdom and illumination, reincarnation and cyclic processes. In European traditions, the triangle or threefold forms often stand for triune deities or tripartite cosmology, heaven, earth, underworld. So in ceremonial magic and related folklore, triangles trap or constrain spirit energy by giving it a bounded, oriented field to appear in, where triangulation, for the psychological or strategic sense, uses a 3-point structure to fix, frame, or control a force or relationship. So what we're doing there is like, in order to have a 3-dimensional, even a 2-dimensional, just any, a polygon, if you only have 2 points, you can only have a line. So you need a third point to connect things to. So you have at least like a base for something. You could also think of it as like a TV screen, and there's an electromagnetic field in there. And that is how, in the, religious frameworks, the God came into completion, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, or whatever Trinity you want to think of, right? So the magician knows that it's not just about incorporating the the principles of nature into your own systems. You want to embody as much as you can in your entire, experience, field of experience, a miniature universe, right? So, for example, people that understand this, like the Grateful Dead, I always use them as an example. In their music, like normally in rock music, you just strum power chords or whatever. You're not playing specific individual notes all the time that have function and have a purpose and contribute something meaningful with every single note, right? So their janitor once vetoed them signing a contract. So the rules and the principles, the ethos of their microcosm, in order to create maximum coherence, were holographically distributed. So the same principles that guided their ethics in their life, guided their music, and informed their business practices. And you know what I mean? So that's kind of what the triangle containing the demon is based on, that this like container for the sustained and gave like a holistic dimension. I'm not phrasing this very well, but to the original consciousness from which everything emanated, you're doing that in a tiny form. And also remember that when we talk about demons in this context, we're not actually talking about evil spirits. We're talking about aspects of our own consciousness. This is something that one of the most damaging things that the machine did to humanity was to convince everyone to accept the superstitious interpretations of esoteric knowledge as like the explanation for what they are, right? Whether you think it's fake and superstitious or real and superstitious doesn't matter. That is how they've fucking disempowered humanity, really. And if you look back at old texts like Eliphas Levi's Transcendental Magic and Hermes and whatnot, it's very, very clear that they did not interpret these things in a superstitious way that people assume they do. And in fact, the sustaining that perception was a deliberate deception over the centuries, For example, long time ago, I came up with the explanation for like channeling the dead, because I had a couple of experiences where I knew things that I couldn't possibly know that were 100% accurate. There was no guessing, And first I realized I was in the same room with one of the people and that he had all the information in his nervous system. So there could have been like some kind of field-based exchange or something. And then my mom, I did it to, like really highly specifically. And then I realized I was in her stomach when this information was given to her. And I mean, that's kind of a stretch, but I'm not sure that inheritance of memory isn't a viable explanation. But just to play devil's advocate here, I came up with the other theory that there are like residual information husks, I guess. There's probably a better way to put it. Like in the 0 point field or wherever information is retained. And that we can actually interface with the dead in a sense, but it's not actually them. It's just like this, like a, I mean, you guys know what I mean. It's just data, it has all of their memories, but it's not literally them. It makes no sense that dead people would just be hanging around talking to the living for what, all of eternity, or, like we don't get reincarnated, or do we? You know what I mean? Like, what are people saying? So, like 10 years after I had that thought that maybe that's a thing, Eliphas Levi's book, Transcendental Magic, he describes that that's what spirits are according to these esoteric traditions, the Hermetic lineages. So, you know what I mean? That's how these traditions, I guess I could say we have always thought about these things. There are mechanisms that facilitate everything. Woo isn't real. It's not that there isn't more to the universe than just like the reductionist interpretation or whatever, but like even Aleister Crowley and Magic and Theory and Practice wrote, demons are not objectively real. Spirits are not objectively real. They're not unreal exactly, but they're not real in the way that IRS is real. So I just wanted to clarify it while we're talking about trapping demons and triangles and whatnot, what that actually means. So, okay, in Goetic traditions, the magic triangle, the specific way that it's deployed, it's typically a black equilateral triangle, 3 feet across, placed roughly 2 feet from the operator's circle. The base of the triangle faces the circle, right? The apex points towards the quarter of the spirit being summoned, literally opening the space toward that entity's domain. The conjuration explicitly commands the spirit to appear in the triangle or else he be cast into a bottomless abyss, framing the triangle as the only safe or allowed locus of manifestation. Again, think about how that corresponds to the way that I explained the symbolism of the all-seeing eye. You know, they're telling you a lot there. Conceptually, this is a geometric boundary condition for non-physical phenomena. So the spirit is given a limited directional landing pad, separate from the human space, yet close enough for interaction. The all-seeing eye is floating above the pyramid, right? It's not quite touching it. Medieval demon traps add another layer. Demons are lured and held by following endless lines. Graffiti research notes that pentagrams and similar figures were understood as closed, unending lines that demons would compulsively follow, becoming stuck in the pattern. And if you think about demons as like they're not consciously controlled, like instinctive forces, right? Like our lower impulses and whatnot. If you put an ant on a piece of paper and you draw a line, it will follow the line around. That may just be where they got the idea, but I don't think that this idea of the correlation, I guess, with instinctive conscious forces, I do think that the ant's behavior, I think, is connected. I know that was not super well articulated, but again, remember that the base of the all-seeing eye, each triangle, the points are the 4 fundamental forces of physics and the 4 elements and the 4 directions. So the laws of nature, and then we are trapping some kind of consciousness within the triangle. The 4 sides are based on the laws of nature. This is what we're using to funnel up. Also, we're funneling the laws of nature into a concentrated apex of power. Everything below the eye is progressively less and less conscious until we hit the base, right? So they're containing the unconscious. Anyways, I already explained all that earlier, I guess. Yeah, and so because the line is connected, the thing just is going to just follow it around forever, and it can't get out. A triangle by itself is not as labyrinthine as a pentagram, but once you add inner circles, names, sigils, or repeating patterns inside it, the triangle becomes a frame for trapping circuit. The entity enters the defined field, and then its movement is constrained by the inner geometry. So a triangle delimits 3 reference points in space. Any energy attention inside that frame is defined relative to those 3 anchors or free floating. The apex direction acts as a vector for force, pointing upward, a quarter astral direction or planet, while the base nearest the operator gives a stable front for negotiation. Because a triangle is a minimum shape that creates an enclosed, rigid figure, it's ideal in occult logic as a minimal containment, the least geometry needed to make here different from there. So when magicians put the demon in the triangle, they are not just drawing a random shape, they are declaring a separate field inside the triangle distinct from their own circle. Giving the entity a bounded, oriented role, appear here, face this way, obey these names, sigils, etc., inscribed on or around the lines, often embedding names of deity or power words on the sides which act as symbolic locks or vectors further structuring the spirit's behavior. The word triangulation in psychology and abuse literature means pulling in a third party to control or shape a dyadic relationship, classic in manipulative or demonic interpersonal patterns. The manipulator positions themselves as point A, victim as point B, and third party or abstract authority, rumor, truth, whatever, as C. So power flows through the triangle instead of direct AB contact. Communication, validation, and pressure are rerouted through C, which becomes the controlling vertex. And this is exactly what I was describing about the way that they use presidential candidates to anchor it. Instinct at the base, apex conscious attention, and then their directive is the completion of the triangulation. In psychological triangulation, the third node is the frame that determines how the other two can move, socially, emotionally, or informationally. Both cases use a three-point structure to trap or bound possibilities. Demons are restricted to the triangle. People are restricted to patterns defined by the manipulator's chosen third point. Triangulation, in the esoteric sense, is basically just that anytime you have three fixed poles, whether it's two people plus a belief, or an influence, two impulses plus a narrative, two forces plus a sigil, you are building a triangle that defines what can happen inside of that relational field. Esoterically, trapping energy means arranging conditions so that a particular current cannot act outside the pattern you have drawn, whether that pattern is geometric triangle or on the floor, or a narrative, triangulating people through an agenda or a story or a narrative. So triangles in demonology and in manipulation are both about constraining a force using three nodes instead of facing it directly in a free open dyad. So if you want to hear more about that, I'm gonna flesh it out considerably more in the next Substack article, and I'll continue sharing some of that stuff on YouTube. But I have to be fair to myself because I'm demonetized here and my Substack content is paid. So you guys on YouTube are going to get a filtered version because that's just how the world works these days, I guess. At least of this content. You know, I'm not saying I'm holding stuff back exactly, but how am I feeling? All right. So you guys have any other questions or subjects or topics that you would like me to I mean, I'm working on already on a third segment for this series. Excuse me, about how technology and pharmaceuticals are playing into all this. I almost just don't even want to do it. Just for the mindfuck elements of it. So please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. Follow me on Substack if you don't already, because like I said, we're demonetized here. Algorithm doesn't find a lot of favor in my content, so I really appreciate manual sharing also. Please hit the bell notifications. I noticed that my people that have clicked all is lower than average, and that really hurt my feelings. So it'd be great if y'all would fix that. Let's see, what, 12:49? I guess I got a minute. Let's see if you guys come up with anything. I don't see any questions, comments. All right, let's talk a little bit about this modern expansion. Just a little bit, though. I don't want to spoil my articles for those of you that also follow me on Substack. Exploring the limits of epistemology. Yeah, that's going to be a good one, too. Sorry, guys. Give me a second. Okay, we'll just do an excerpt from this third article, but not the whole thing. I'm just going to randomly jump in at some point. So, the 20th century introduced mass broadcasting, radio, television, cinema, which allowed governments to reach entire populations simultaneously. Joseph Goebbels Ministry of Propaganda in Nazi Germany remains the textbook example of centralized state manipulation, controlling all media, coordinating messages, and engineering public emotion at national scale. However, these methods remain blunt instruments compared to what they're doing right now. They could push messages broadly, but could not customize them. Modern technology has fundamentally changed the equation, and they can do this shit in real time, which is, I'm sure you guys have had the experience by now of like thinking something really abstract and then your phone beeps and it's a notification on that very thing that maybe you've never even thought about before, and which has happened to me where there's nothing in my search history. It could be the result of very advanced analysis, but I honestly suspect that it has more to do with the actual entrainment of our consciousness with some underlying algorithmic current, I guess, like a universal algorithm. I prefer that explanation. I don't know which is true. So, algorithmic personalization. Social media platforms now serve content based on engagement patterns, not quality or accuracy. This creates filter bubbles, algorithmic environments where users are exposed primarily to content that reinforces existing beliefs. Micro-targeting is where political campaigns and state actors use psychographic profiling to deliver tailored messages to specific demographic segments. Cambridge Analytica's operations during the 2016 U.S. election demonstrated how data harvesting from social media could be used to construct psychological profiles and deliver personalized messages. Real-time feedback loops. Modern propaganda systems can measure emotional responses in real time through engagement metrics and adjust messaging instantly. So this creates adaptive propaganda that learns and evolves based on what works. This is where ancient technique meets modern technology. Recent advances in neuroscience have revealed how propaganda exploits fundamental features of human cognition, not as incidental manipulation, but as systematic engineering of perception. Neural filtering and confirmation bias. So human brains evolved to process information efficiently, not accurately. That's super important. The brain continuously filters incoming data through frameworks of existing beliefs, a process neuroscientists call motivated reasoning. When new information contradicts established information or models, the brain experiences cognitive dissonance, a psychologically uncomfortable state that most people resolve by rejecting the new information rather than updating their beliefs. And I need to rewrite that line because it's not really that people do that. It's that the nervous system does it before you even have a chance to you have no input. You know what I mean? Like you have no agency when it comes to this neural filtering. Confirmation bias happens at the neural level. The brain literally suppresses contradictory information before it reaches conscious awareness. So propaganda doesn't need to hide the truth. It only needs to activate this filtering mechanism. Strategic inversion. Modern propaganda frequently exploits this by presenting obviously false claims alongside contradictory evidence. This forces the brain into a choice: engage with the evidence, which causes dissonance, or reject the entire package. Most people choose the latter. The dopamine loop. Social media platforms are engineered around dopaminergic feedback loops. So variable reward schedules, unpredictable bursts of engagement, all of these things trigger dopamine release in the nucleus accumbens, creating compulsive use patterns. The neurological architecture shapes what content spreads. So propaganda that triggers emotional arousal, particularly negative emotions like fear, anger, and disgust, generates more engagement than nuanced or complex content. The algorithm, optimized for engagement, therefore amplifies emotionally activating content, which frequently includes manipulative messaging. Fatigue of truth. Research in cognitive psychology has demonstrated that decision-making depletes cognitive resources. So when people are tired, stressed, or cognitively overloaded, they rely more heavily on heuristics, mental shortcuts that can be easily manipulated. Modern information environments overload cognitive capacity deliberately. The volume of information, combined with the need to constantly make judgments about accuracy, creates a state of truth fatigue where people default to trusting familiar sources or emotional resonant narratives rather than engaging with complex evidence. Russian information operations offer a case study in modern propaganda architecture. Rather than simply spreading the false narratives, Russian disinformation campaigns frequently employ fire hose of falsehood, high volume, multi-threaded messaging that makes it impossible to track individual claims. This architecture exploits cognitive load with so many conflicting narratives circulating, audiences become overwhelmed and retreat to trusted sources, which can include the disinformation sources themselves, and often are. The sheer volume of manipulation becomes a tool of itself, degrading overall trust in information ecosystems in general. The architecture of polarization. The 2020s have seen growing evidence that social media algorithms create feedback loops that accelerate polarization. Research has demonstrated that content recommending increasingly extreme positions generates higher engagement, which trains the algorithm to surface more extreme content, creating what researchers call algorithmic radicalization. This is not necessarily intentional, but it is intentional, and it emerges from optimizing for engagement metrics without regard for downstream social effects. But the result is functionally equivalent to a propaganda system designed to fragment societies along ideological lines. And that's the thing about a lot of this stuff. Somebody argued earlier that they don't think that the system is capable of strategically aligning, the contradictions in candidates and correlating that with these, like Trump being marketed as a pred hunter and then being the star candidate of the Epstein files. But even if these things just happen to be extraordinarily improbable aggregate of extremely convenient coincidences for the elite, which seems fucking stupid as hell to me, but I guess it's not beyond the possibility of, coincidence being coincidence. It has the same effect at the end of the day. Doesn't, okay, fine. It just is what it is. Still, this is what's happening to people because of it. It doesn't really make much of a difference whether it's completely engineered or partially engineered or, it's kind of a waste of time to talk about that at this point. Well, it has some relevance, but, it doesn't change anything. Emerging neurotechnology raises the possibility of more direct forms of cognitive capture, neural interfaces, brain stimulation techniques, pharmaceutical inventions that could theoretically influence neural processing directly. And so that's that. I'm not going to read the whole article and spoil it for my Substack people, but that's where we're going. But actually, the next one is on the esoteric, the deployment of esoteric knowledge in these architectures of manipulation and empirical rule and whatnot. So, check in with the chat again. Appreciate you beyond the illusion. Substack is a really good platform. Lots of like open-minded academic types. You got to be careful though. I've busted a lot of fake PhDs on that platform. I mean, anybody can start an account and put PhD behind their name. I actually caught one guy promoting himself as some business PhD, and he was actually had a PhD in philosophy or something. So some of them even have PhDs, but they kind of like frame themselves without directly lying in a few cases that I've seen. But still, the content that they're producing and the PhD behind their name implies that they're a PhD in some serious field, when oftentimes they got their PhD from some crackerbox university and it's in some stupid thing, that has nothing to do with the content they're making. So just a little word to the wise, watch out for all that. All right, y'all. I have a little bit of lag, so I'll give you a few minutes to pop anything in the chat. If you have any questions or subjects you'd like me to weigh in, we're still booking for the retreats in the Amazon in fall and early winter. And I do offer consultations, and we are demonetized, so please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron to support the channel. It can be demoralizing sometimes because the algorithm does not like me. And and I've been demonetized for a long time for absolutely no reason. They didn't really give any like realistic explanation, and it's a lifetime ban from AdSense, like period, as if I committed some terrible crime or something. You know, the only thing they said, it was like invalid click activity. I don't even know what the fuck that is, and I don't think I even ever looked it up. It definitely isn't true either. What actually happened is that I had a stream. For some reason, the algorithm blew it up to, I think, 16,700 people or something. And when I saw the number start climbing, I was like, oh shit, I got to talk about something that really matters when I have such a huge audience. And I started talking about all this. And like the next day or 2 days later, I was demonetized. And my views dropped to, from 120,000 to, 100 or whatever, and they've never changed. And at that time I had like 1,500 or 2,000 subs. Now I have 17,500 or something, and the views have stayed the same. Doesn't matter how many subscribers I have, they don't push out the videos. It's the same number of people over the years. So we definitely appreciate the support. I need some kind of motivation other than the good that it's going to do. That's nice, but I can't eat it, really. I guess I can when you guys pay me. Ate some mushrooms last night and had a huge breakthrough with my vocals. I was so happy. It was one of the most satisfying things that ever happened to me in my life. Because I thought I was old and I would never get my Chris Cornell, Maynard James Keenan kind of grit and fry and that kind of sound back. And then last night, something just clicked, and I realized, by the way, if any of you are aspiring singers, it's something that in the past I could land in every once in a while, but I didn't know how I was doing it. And it turns out that all of that distortion is resonance. It's got nothing to do with squeezing your throat. It's not strain. It's none of that shit. Compression can be a thing, but when it's right, it's just this. It's almost like there's a mask. It's you know what it felt like? It felt like I found a distortion pedal that I didn't know I had and just clicked it on. Almost nothing changed. It was just something about how I was positioning the muscles in my face or something, and all of a sudden I could blend right in with Maynard James Keenan and Chris Cornell and whatnot. So that was fucking awesome. And no, it's not a mushroom hallucination. I was worried about that. But I got confirmation that I just disappeared into into Maynard's voice or whatever, because my note control was so perfect, and the fry and the affectation was so precise that you couldn't tell who was who. It blended in perfectly. I couldn't fucking believe it. I'm 47 years old. You're supposed to lose the ability to do that kind of shit at my age, I thought. And I thought I had, but I haven't. So hopefully before too long, I'll be putting some music out. I'm still working on the Illumigati rap project. I have been working on my flow too much. I wake up with Bone Thugs and Harmony in my head first thing in the morning, and from trying to learn the most technical lines and whatnot. It's actually almost embarrassing how much that stuff is coming out of my mouth. It just seems so wildly inappropriate, A 47-year-old white dude that's heavily involved in plant medicine, walking around spitting bone bars all day. Sorry. All right, checking the chat one more time. If there's nothing there, I'm going to sign out. If you could click your fingers and change anything, what would you change? I mean, that is a pretty damn broad question. Like, I'm assuming we have parameters we're working within here, like things that exist only in the current moment. Like, could I click my fingers and change one decision I made in the past? Because I might be selfish enough to actually do that, because the consequences of that would reverberate out into society, and it would have been positive. So that's not really that selfish. Um, but if you mean in the here and now, I would just disengage all of our consciousness from indoctrination and programming. I would just will fucking internal coherence in the entire human race and entrainment with truth. You know, I mean, like I said, that's a pretty broad like wish for anything. That's what I would do. Pretty on topic too, isn't it? But that's really it. I honestly believe that most of the suffering that is not a necessary consequence of the system parameters that we exist in is a result of social engineering. You know, so I think that if we were to eliminate those influences and their residue from humanity in an instant, the next instant would be indescribably remarkable. Because, for example, we have research has shown, this is something that people in various esoteric traditions have known forever. But our consciousness is connected to solar activity. So there are 11-year solar cycles, and my entire life follows a pattern that is perfectly synchronized. I was born at the peak of a solar cycle, and I had my major, I guess, coming into coherence experience at the peak of another solar cycle. And 11 is a number of magical expansion and symmetry. 1111 is a glyph of internal symmetry and expansion coming into greater, I guess, symmetry with your external. Like if the subconscious is your external world, matter, then that outer experience, the conscious is your internal processing of that. Then when the two main systems of your brain come into greater balance, homeostasis, symmetry, you experience that as symmetry with your experience, right? So if the truth was known universally and the programming and dissonance and confusion and incoherence was just suddenly removed from the human race, we would be in a situation where maybe the whole entire human race understood what the peak of a solar cycle was about, and we would have like a global fucking holiday to entrain with it. You know what I mean? There are so many things that hold so much potential that we are just so thinly separated from integrating. I don't necessarily believe that it's possible to have like a complete utopia, because that's not how the universe is constructed. It requires a perfect balance of opposites. And because it's holographic, meaning is architectural just as much as the architecture creates meaning. It's all reflections. I know I was going somewhere good with that, but it's 1:00 in the morning and I just totally lost my train of thought. But, you know, I think I probably got enough communicated. So, yeah. All right, guys. Well, it's getting late here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Please consider supporting us. And I'll be back tomorrow. I kind of put off the autistic outlaw thing, partly because streams where I talk about myself are kind of uncomfortable. But I do it because I think it may help someone avoid a lot of difficulties and perhaps bring certain things into focus. But we're definitely going to do it tomorrow. I got my nuts up. And